I'm made of thunder. I'm made of lightning. I'm made of dirt, yeah. Made of the fine things. My father taught me that I'm a speck of dust and this world was made for me. So let's go and try our luck. Yeah. I've got my roots down, 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 deep.
So excited to be here this Saturday late morning. We just wanted to give credit to the song that we hope some of you heard. That was by Rising Appalachia, and the song is called Resilient, and we sing that with our choir and we love it. It's just a really positive reminder that we have everything we need inside and to really use the resources and to create the resilience that we need within and without in the world as well. So just going to introduce ourselves briefly. I'm going to turn it over to Lydia.
My name's Lydia Nielsen, and both of us actually, we live in Santa Cruz, so that's where we're joining you from. And I got involved with permaculture in 2003-ish. I took a PDC with Penny Livingston in Bolinas on the coast, West Marin, and I realized it encompassed everything that I was interested in, and I in particular was caught by this idea of building soil and harvesting water and reusing water to the maximum capacity. And from there, I took more permaculture classes. Eventually, Penny Livingston invited me to join her teaching team, which was this huge honor. And she is an amazing permaculture teacher if you haven't heard from her. And then at a certain point, I got involved with the Santa Cruz Waldorf School and was hired as the garden teacher there. And that is when I met Anne.
Right, so my daughters and Lydia's son went to the Waldorf School here in Santa Cruz together, and my daughters, got to meet Lydia, and we got to teach different classwork in the garden. As a parent, I did. So for myself, I came into permaculture really in a roundabout but pretty beautiful way, and I started many years ago. I was an organic produce buyer in San Francisco when I was in college, and I also worked at the Women's Health Center there. So immediately had those two loves, and did a lot of environmental justice work, environmental activism, worked with Forests Forever, worked, against, I guess, and for a plastic incinerator project in Kettleman City with that back in the day with students from Berkeley. And my life really changed. I really thought I was absolutely into organic gardening and practicing that, and regenerative agriculture and regeneration in general. And then I got the opportunity to see Vandana Shiva speak. And I really wanted to go into law, is what I thought. And what her talk really brought to my mind was the importance of bringing people who are into healthcare and the holistic health of not only the planet but people, and how we need people doing that to be professional witnesses to protect communities like Kettleman City and other ones where things are happening that are really going to deteriorate not just the landscape but also the people. So that presentation with Vandana Shiva put me into on a path of studying public health. And I did that with community health education. I've been doing that for about 30 years now and absolutely love it. And when I met Lydia, we just started off hours of conversations around the overlap with permaculture and personal health, and how the way we want to work within nature with permaculture is the way we want to work within our own bodies, and to really see the overlaps and the patterns that exist in nature exist in ourselves. And that's, so about 2.5, 3 years ago, we came up with our Vital Cycles, creating personal and planetary resilience curriculum, which really ties those all together. Do you want to speak more to that at all? Or
well, just real briefly, what we love in our Vital Cycles curriculum is making these very distinct parallels between soil health, for example, and digestive health. That the flora, the diversity of flora, the robustness of that in our gut, and the robustness and diversity of flora and fauna in the soil, there's a whole parallel ecology going on. And even nutrient-wise, if you look at the elements in a soil test and then the elements on a vitamin bottle, it's the same things. Yeah. So plants need the same things that we need, and plants are fed by the organisms in the soil, and we're fed by the organisms in our digestion. So that's just your tiny little taster there, but that was actually the first facet of this multifaceted integration that kind of drew us down this beautiful spiraling I'll say rabbit hole, but it was, you know, so much wilder than a rabbit hole.
It's more like a keyhole, which we'll be talking about later when we get into patterns.
It was a waterfall of joy. So anyway, we have a lot of fun together, and what we love is integrating the insights that we have from the different disciplines that we have background in, and bringing them together and putting them all under this umbrella of permaculture, which you could also call ecological design, which you could also just call planetary consciousness. So that's where we're coming from.
Yeah, great. So without further ado, we're going to get into our Permaculture 101, Patterns and Principles. So this has been a super fun talk for us to work on. You know, it's not about what to say, it's about having, 45 minutes, right, when this is so juicy, and so it's the base of permaculture. Yeah. And so what is permaculture, right? So
well, I just wanted, sorry to interrupt you, but real quick. So normally this material that we're going to try to cover in the next hour would be covered in either an 8-hour day or a 16-hour weekend. So we had to do a lot of condensing.
Juicy bits.
We're hoping to give you like the best, most intriguing, most informative nuggets of what this body of work really is.
Yes. Yeah, and I just saw in the chat, yes, and we will be sharing book lists and some videos and articles with you all after this talk again, so that it'll take you further than we can necessarily in this 45 minutes. But I think what we have planned is going to be awesome. Yeah. And we're hoping to, maybe blow a few of your minds and get you thinking differently just when you look out your windows or you look out into your gardens. Okay, so what is permaculture, right? So Lydia, why don't you talk about the history?
Sure. So the word permaculture and the kind of concept of it that people are bandying about these days came from two men, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, and they lived in Australia, still do. And in the 1970s, they were both involved with the University of Tasmania. Bill Mollison was a adjunct professor, I think, and David Holmgren was a graduate student. And they sort of connected around their shared observation that academics was really boxed up, that everybody was stuck in their own little disciplines.
Little silos.
And making decisions without really considering the extended ramifications or influences. And so they put together Permaculture One, which was the very first permaculture design manual, in which they started to express an understanding of the world based on the model of the forest, that the forest doesn't need anything delivered to it, and the forest doesn't need to have anything taken away from it. And that is kind of the foundational concept that all of permaculture has unfolded from.
Yeah, and I think it's important, we always really like to presence the fact that, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, two men in Australia, really permaculture is based in what they also both had an interest in and observed so much was the indigenous wisdoms of the Aboriginal people of Australia. So a lot of what permaculture is based in is actually thousands and thousands of years old and can be really attributed to the indigenous peoples of Australia. And both of them do a really good job, we feel, of really presencing that, and we really want to do that too, as we're speaking. So again, what's permaculture? So the way I like to say it, the easiest, is just a one-liner that permaculture is working with rather than against nature, right? So we're working with rather than against nature. That's the most common one. And then you like a couple other
I mean, that one doesn't give you a lot of detail. So where do we get some more detail? Well, there's another definition that permaculture is a process for designing or redesigning systems to function regeneratively within the ecological context of their physical location. And this is actually ours that we crafted. And when you start looking into different permaculture teachers and definitions, you'll find that everybody kind of has their own version of things, and you may want to write out your own as well. But we're all trying to distill the same kind of idea here, and it's about this ecological context and being a part of the ecological system that we're living in.
Exactly. And so with permaculture, just as do you want to share any of the other
I think
why don't you share both of those.
Okay. So then there's another permaculture person, Sepp Holzer. He's from Austria, and his definition, one of them, is that a permaculture system is a system that resembles nature and is based on natural cycles and ecosystems.
I like that one a lot.
Natural cycles and ecosystems. So again, we're rooting into, you know, what is the being of the planet and the ecology that we're already a part of, and how can we work with that and not be imposing some human being idea of how everything should be, or forcing everything to bend to our will, or just destroying everything and putting in 10,000 acres of carrots or what have you.
Yeah. Great. So
do the Bill Mollison one there?
Yeah, and so then Bill Mollison, one of the founders, he likes to say, or he has said, that permaculture design is a system of assembling conceptual, material, and strategic components in a pattern. Okay, we're going to be talking about patterns, which functions to benefit life in all of its forms. Right? So it's such a beautiful way of thinking that we're not just going to benefit the human people on a landscape. We're going to benefit, the soil organisms and the other, the birds, you know, the other little critters, is everybody, and the trees, all the beings, all the time. So that's really the goal of permaculture. So when we're working in permaculture and thinking like a permaculturist, or a permie, we like to call ourselves, we're asking ourselves lots of questions. And the two main questions that we're asking ourselves is, what is going on in our world? What is going on in our world? Or what is going on in my garden? What is going on in this landscape? What is going on right now?
What is going on in my body?
Right, if you wanted to take
whatever scale,
right? So any scale. So what's going on right now in this context? And then the next question is, what's going to happen now? What's going to happen next? So I'm not even going to go to the global implications of that right now, but just let's bring it into a landscape. So we're looking at what's actually happening and what is going to happen next. And the permaculture design process is going to answer both of those questions. It's really important to answer both, not just what you want to see, but in order to know how to best design what you want to come next, you need to be really clear about what actually exists right now. So very key. And I think that those are two questions we could apply to most aspects of our life, right?
Yeah.
So we're gonna start to talk about principles.
I'm going to say a word about ethics too, because we didn't.
Oh, great.
Yeah. Okay. Can I?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So permaculture presents us with this guiding framework, which we refer to as the Permaculture Principles and Ethics. And depending on what teacher you go and check out, you'll find different versions of the principles. And we've been working primarily with the set of 26 by Bill Mollison that came to us through Penny Livingston, and then a simplified set of 12 that came out of David Holmgren. So even the co-originators, they've got different lists. David's are a little bit more kind of consistent, but you know, cutesy, and Bill's are kind of irregular but more comprehensive. And they really are our guiding lights, and a little bit more on that in a second.
Yeah.
The other piece of permaculture is these three ethics: land care, earth care, people care, and fair share or distribution of surplus, or there's many ways to talk about that third ethic, but really it's about, you know, not taking more than you need. And when you have managed to produce through your system extra, that you redistribute that you pass it on for other people to bring their systems into their full vitality. And so, you know, they're kind of a no-duh, but they're also really fundamental, like how many other design systems bring in ethics? I don't know of any others. And then just to kind of contextualize that with another quote from David Holmgren: applying permaculture ethics and principles in gardens and homes inevitably leads us towards redesigning our ways of living so as to be more in tune with nature and its local surpluses and limits. So that kind of sums up the foundation. And from here, we're going to dive more into principles.
Right, so I guess important just to define what is a principle. What are we talking about when we're talking about a principle? So just a definition of a principle is that it serves as a foundation for a system of belief or behavior, or what we really like, a chain of reasoning, right? So this is a foundation for a way of looking at the world. And our teacher, Hazel Ward up in Oregon, she really likes to say that permaculture principles, yes, a lot of people say that they're like a lens, but what Hazel likes to say, which is so rich, is that the each principle is like a story, right? So within each principle, there is a story. There's also a pattern, which will be connecting throughout. And those stories, these principles, are stories that help ground us in the work and ground us in the process of designing with nature.
Mm-hmm. And there, you can think of them sort of as fables. Like we have these cultural stories that teach us a lesson. Like if somebody says to you, well, don't be the boy who cried wolf. Oh, you understand, we've most of us learned that story in our childhood. And so we have a whole realm of associated lessons that come along with that story. And don't be the boy who cried wolf is the trigger that brings us back into that learning. So each of these principles can connect us back to a bigger piece of learning in that way.
Right, and so like Lydia, as Lydia already said, so Bill Mollison has a set of 26 permaculture principles, and then David has 12, it's his 12. So we're not gonna go into all of those. We picked our favorites. Well, actually we love them all, but we picked the ones that we feel could be the most relevant for all of you in your homes or your gardens or just wherever you are, being able to apply these. And the other thing about the principles is that they're meant to be very universal, so that they can be applied, yeah, again, not to any landscape, any type of ecosystem, even our personal ecosystems. And yeah, so we're gonna talk about, maybe we'll introduce the three principles that are just,
they're like the foundational context of the rest of them.
Exactly. Yeah. And also to say, if you get really into permaculture, like we did, you'll find that teachers all around the world, different permaculture teachers and thought leaders, they come up with their own, right? So Bill Mollison had 26, David Holmgren has 12, I think Starhawk has 9, but they all are sort of weaving within the same fables, the same stories, the same foundational thought processes involved in the permaculture design process.
Yeah, the concepts are the same, and you'll find those commonalities as you begin to familiarize yourself with them. And just to note that often people in the beginning of their permaculture journey, they're looking for a recipe or a prescription, like, how do I save my this? How do I do my that? You know, and there is no recipe, because every single site that you work on is totally individual. And that's why we have principles. The principles help you apply this foundational way of looking at the world, this perspective, to whatever situation you find yourself in. So you will not find a recipe book. Well, you can find them out there if you look at them, but they're not really universally helpful. They're specific to their particular site. So what you want is to get familiar with these concepts.
Right, and just about the recipe book, like I have a ton of recipe books, but I like to read a recipe and then I make it my own. So that's kind of what permaculture is really inviting you to do that. Like, here's the recipe, but you know, whatever, you got more basil, then throw that in too. Anyway, so the top principle is observation, right? So observation is a permaculture principle, right? And this is whole being awareness, right? So the idea of the observation is, you know, I like to say, so we're using all of our senses. It's not just visual. It's actually, it's listening, it's feeling, it's touching into a space. So, you know, just like listening is hearing with intent, right? Observation is sensing with intent. So not just your eyes, you're sensing with intent to get to know the space. And I like to use the example, I think this is where we wanted to put this, where, you know, we're in Santa Cruz, it's a beach town, it's college, and, you know, vacation, and a new vacation rental comes up all the time, and you can always tell if that house was designed by someone who'd actually been to the site and observed what was there or not. Because the new one that went up recently, it has this gorgeous picture window that looks onto the wall of the house right next door. Meanwhile, you know, they could have just turned the house slightly if they had been there and known that house was there and made it an ocean view. So just, again, you know, observation is key, and you don't really want to make any designs anywhere without actually first having a while to just sit and notice.
Yeah. The next sort of foundational contextual principle that we want to bring up is everything gardens. Everything gardens. What does this mean? Everything is manipulating its own environment. And we used to say everything gardens or manipulates its own environment for its own benefit, but that's not even true. Some things incidentally kind of time themselves out. They create an environment that they are no longer the best suited for. They're part of that phase of the system. So we're always changing our environment. Trees are changing the environment. The gophers are changing the environment. Like, this is just what live beings do. And so recognizing that and working with that influence of not just you, but every other being that you're participating with really helps you just like balloon out the impact that you can have.
Exactly. And then the last one, we're going to actually be weaving principles throughout this whole time. But the third one we want to talk about this moment is just work within nature. So again, working with rather than against. And so we had this great quote from the author of The One Straw Revolution, Masanobu Fukuoka. And he says, which is so great, that if you throw nature out the window, she'll come back through the door with the pitchfork, right? So if you're going to try to design without working within nature, she's going to come back. She's going to come back because she's there. There she is, right? So I'm sure we can think of lots of, housing complexes built on floodplains or fire zones. Like, those are just like the most obvious examples of working within nature or not working within nature. So those are just 3 ones. We invite you to use those immediately in your life if you're not already. So now we're going to start to talk about the very first design tool that informs the design process. Right, and so you wanted to share. So, and before we do that, so this design tool uses patterning, which is the other part of our talk, which Lydia is going to introduce the idea of patterning.
Yeah, so patterning, I think we all are familiar with the word to some extent. Many of us think it's more decorative or about designs, designs instead of design. But really, patterns are these things we can recognize that give us information about what just happened and what's happening next. So they can be patterns in space or they can be patterns in time. And Bill Mollison says that the use of patterns in designs allows us or facilitates the best flow, function, and yield while conserving resources. So we're designing for the best flow, function, and yield while conserving resources. And we're going to flesh out several of our favorite patterns in the next 20 minutes here. So
yeah.
Anne's going to take on the first one.
Well, we're going to do zones and sectors, right? So zones and sectors. So we're talking about zones and sectors. I'm about to share screen. Don't worry, you're not going to be just looking at us this whole entire time. So zones and sectors. And again, we're going to send you a handout that's going to be shared with you through Sustainable Solano. And also we're doing this because sometimes it's hard to be on Zoom and then writing and looking. So just bear with us. So zones and sectors are about energy, actually energy flow, function, and yield to that effect, right? So the zones and sectors in permaculture design is the zones, you're thinking of it, the zones are where we are putting our energy. The zones are where we are able to tend and we're putting our focus, right? So it's coming from
within. So this is energy from the center radiating outwards. So wherever we spend our most time, we're putting in our most awareness and our most attention. And the places we spend less time get less from us and we get less from them.
Okay, so again, zones, central, coming out. Sectors are distinctly different because sectors are referring to those influences that are coming from outside. Okay, so these are sectors in permaculture design. The really obvious ones are the sun or wind or water, but it can also be noise. It can be traffic, shade, pollution. So these are all things that are coming from the periphery into the center and affecting those. And now both zones and sectors. Did you want to say more about sectors actually before I move on?
Well, just like to visualize the sectors, you can sort of picture yourself in a sphere and think of them as coming into your sphere from whatever area they're coming to. And we'll show you a graphic in a minute about how you can represent that and work with it two-dimensionally. But these are both really quite three-dimensional concepts.
Right, and you want to start your permaculture design process with these zones and sectors because again, the zones and sectors answer those first 2 questions. What is happening right now and what's going to happen next? right? So what's happening now is what are your zones and what are your sectors? And so it's important too, so once you know that, you can consciously alter your zones and you can consciously alter your sectors. Now, can you change the way the sun moves across the sky? No, but you can change where you put a tree so you can have more shade. You have wind that's ripping apart, you know, you can have a hedgerow that makes the wind a little bit calmer in a certain area. So that's through observation and working with nature. What's already here, what do I want to have, and how can I design with nature to create that?
And so to work with those two concepts for zones, like where do I spend my time and why, and how can I make that more effective, efficient, comfortable, lovely, etc. And with sectors, what's coming towards me, and do I like it the way it is? How can I alter it? How can I dissipate it, concentrate it, deflect it, etc. So that you create more ideal conditions on your site.
Okay, so we're going to share a graphic with you now. Share screen. Here it is. Okay, so Nicole, I can see you. Can you verify to me that you are seeing what everyone is supposed to be seeing right now? Awesome, I'm gonna make it big. Okay, so what we're seeing here is, this is actually in Gaia's Garden by Toby Hemingway. That's gonna be part of the book list. It's page, what do we say, page 58 in Toby Hemingway's book, Gaia's Garden. And what this is representing here is a 1/4 acre piece of land, which is actually the size of my little piece of land here, and the different zones. So again, the zones are, where are you spending time? Where are you putting your energy? And we want to just lead with this caveat that here, it often gets represented, these zones, as these concentric circles, and it really doesn't have to be that way at all. If you're working on a blank piece of land, you can definitely try to make your zones 1 through 5 fit this.
They just don't.
But they just
almost
don't.
Never do. It's like 0.05% of the time.
So let's just notice. So the house in this case is your zone 0. You yourself, you're actually zone 0, 0. If we're thinking of zones. Right. So you're starting with the house, and then the first area that you spend a lot of time in is your zone 1. So here, it's their patio, it's the lawn. We would even say, so we're imagining based on this, that probably they're parking their car right here. Nicole, can you see the arrow? Yes, yeah. Great, thank you.
So they're parking in the text
if they're
box.
Parking here, this is their whole zone 1. This is their whole zone 1 because they're walking there at least twice a day, depending on how many times they get in their car. Maybe they park their bike here, walk their bike up. So this path is a zone 1. And so notice they have these beautiful keyhole beds that we'll talk about in a moment with patterns. And so this would be your place where you want to put your most, maybe the things you need to harvest, like maybe it is your berries, right? Maybe it is your lettuces. For myself, one of my zone 1s is right out my kitchen or my bedroom door, actually. I put my greens there because I was having a problem harvesting my greens in time. So I put my greens right in my zone 1 because I wake up, I look at them, I'm saying salad for lunch, right? And that helps me have a more efficient system. Let's see, and so the zone 2 that they have here. So again, the zone 1 is where you're hanging out the most, right? Where do you naturally go to? Zone 2 is a little further out. So maybe you don't walk by it, but it's not so far. So if you're on your way home, you could just sort of stop by, check out the berries, check out the shrubs. Maybe you've got some other cool things growing there. Maybe you want to make a bouquet or whatnot. Let's see, where's the zone 3 they have over here? So again, zone 3 is less, like you're gonna go there. There are some fruit and nut trees, but you don't have to be harvesting them all the time. They're seasonal. You can probably see them from the windows of the house to remind yourself to go out there. Out here, this is also, they have this as, let's see, where's zone 4? The zone 4 is the firewood, wild harvest, and they have the zone 5 is this wild area. So it's sort of happening in a circular shape, but again, note that this is a linear zone 1. And that if this, for example, which is a zone 4 or even a zone 2 right now, if this area, if this were a sharp hill or a mountain edge, that could very quickly become a zone 5 because you're not necessarily gonna go there anymore. And you're not gonna be tending that as much.
Yeah, so you can have a zone 1 that abuts right up against the zone 5, and then you have this interesting interface, the edge between the 1 and the 5. And so you can quickly see that this concentric ring model is not particularly useful in, on the ground application.
Right, because even this, depending, yeah. So again, it's not about the circles, it's about where you are putting your energy, where do you go anyway. And notice they have their raised beds and their keyhole beds here, and they have a path. So paths can actually be a big zone 1 or a zone 2, because again, it's not about the concentric circle, it's about your walking that path and walking and harvesting and tending and pruning and deadheading. So you're wanting it to be where it's the most efficient for you.
Yeah.
Right?
And there's lots of charts that you could look up. You could find in 30 seconds charts of what's recommended for each zone. But in general, the things in zone 1 are the things that need need watering or gates opened or eggs collected, and then that you need from, like harvesting, or I guess eggs was in that second category. And so there's nice charts, and they range from like a fully rural sort of thing to, well, how would this work in a more urban environment? So lots of interesting stuff for further reading in there.
Great. Okay, so based on what we've just told you about where you're putting your energy, we wanted to talk and ask you all. So Nicole, we're going to ask people to write in the chat. So based on this, so let's just give a little, again, patio, lawn, pond, chickens are here, raised beds here, fruit and nut trees. There's no compost. So we'd love for people to just looking at this, and based on what we've been explaining about zones, if some brave souls would put into the chat where, and just kind of be like, oh, next to the this or next to the that, where would your compost go? So your compost pick, your chicken scraps and that kind of thing. Where would you want that to go? Because maybe your chickens can't eat all of that compost. And you want to just have the soil.
We can't see the chat.
We can't see the chat, but Nicole can. So if people are putting in, that would be super helpful.
People are putting in behind the chickens, between garden and chickens, zone 3.
Zone 3 over here, could be. Cool. Okay, so those are all, yeah, we were thinking also kind of near the chickens.
Yeah.
Here's why. Any other thoughts? Because we have another one.
Along the path.
So that's a brave soul. And I actually like that idea, because I love that. And here's why we use this example a lot, is because people often have this association with compost that it's yucky and it stinks. And so they think about putting it in zone 3, 4, or sometimes even 5.
Far away.
So why do you think the compost stinks? Is because if you don't put it in your zone 1 or 2, you're going to forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be turning it as often. You're not going to be tending to it or giving it the energy that it needs. Yeah. So you want to actually put it somewhere where you're going to see it and put energy into it and to tend to it.
Yes.
Right. So,
and when it's far away, also you're likely to have a bowl or a bucket of nasty things getting quite moldy and rank on your counter before they make it into the compost pile. And that is an unpleasant experience generally for everyone involved.
Yeah. So then given that as well, do you want to do the bee? We're running a little bit. Maybe
let's skip the bees.
We're going to skip the bees, but we're going to send you this diagram, and we invite you actually to just make a little mock diagram of your own zones 1 through 5.
Yes.
And I say your own zones 1 through 5, again, not the concentric rings, but where's your house and where's your garden and where is your compost, and just, I want to point out, we had a student once and we asked this question and she said, oh, well, my compost is out, it's out by my car. Or it's behind where she put it was like behind the fence, behind the gate, actually. And we were like, why do you have your compost there? And then then she said, well, that's where I park my car. So the front of her house was in the front, but her car was parked behind this gate because her zone 1 was where her car was, because she was going in and out. So her compost was actually in an excellent location, but it wasn't, based on what we were looking at her diagram. So just again, know yourself, know your space.
So when you do this for your own self, you can either take a proper plot map or just do a quick sketch. And this is called doing a zone analysis. And you'll do it in conjunction with sectors, which we're about to go into. And then it would be a zone and sector analysis. And I know that we're talking fast. Thank you all for bearing with us. We have so much we want to share. So let it wash over you if you can't take it all in.
Yeah, let's just do a little check. Nicole, can people just maybe write in the chat if they'd like us to slow down, or if it's good, or you can just give a thumbs up or like a
We're getting a thumbs up. From...
Okay, thumbs up, great. Everyone's thumbs up.
Okay, great.
Great, because we really want to have time for your questions. And obviously we're so passionate about this and have so much to say.
Okay,
so
sectors.
On to sectors. So why don't you introduce sectors?
So sectors, as we said before, these are the energies that are coming from the outside and affecting you, energies coming in. And so the main ones that we usually look at are the summer sun path and the winter sun path. And we won't go into the angles of the sun and the, you know, the movement through the seasons, but just that most of us are aware that in the summer, the sun rises further north and has a longer time in the sky with a higher arc, and in the winter the sun rises further south and has a shorter arc that's lower in the sky. No, I know.
Okay. We'll send it later.
There are so many cool things we want to share about. So you can see on this diagram, the winter sun path is this smaller blue.
I can't see your fingers.
Oh yeah, you can't see my fingers. Okay, it's this smaller blue wedge here, and the summer sun is the larger red wedge, and that gives you a general idea of where you're getting the most sun on your property. But then also check this out, down on the lower right, there's a noise sector. That could be from the town, that could be from an industrial thing, that could be from, you know, a bunch
roosters,
of
chickens,
or the student house, you know, off behind you, they're always partying till whenever. Down on the lower left, we have our fire danger and our view shed. So that's probably looking at some nice wildlands. And so we want to see that, that's the view shed, but also that's the fire danger. And just a word on the fire sector that yes, fire comes uphill towards us from downhill and downwind towards us from upwind, and generally from the wildlands, but actually human activity is a major fire sector that our cars, our power lines, our cigarettes,
our propane tanks,
these are all sources of fire danger. So we need to make sure to include ourselves in the fire sector. And then the animal corridor, this green line going just right of center, that is where the majority of the wildlife is moving through the site. And that could be because it's a little gully or ravine or creek, or it could just be that's the way they have to go to get around some fence, or there's some other obstruction. Super important to know where your animal corridor is, because we love them and they are the double-edged sword of permaculture design.
Right. And if you know it's already an animal corridor, maybe you don't want to plant your super duper yummy food right there, right? You might want to put it, if you can, somewhere else. Right, where maybe they'll come and visit every now and again, but they're not like, whoa, cool buffet, thanks.
Right.
So again, just things to consider when you're designing.
Yes.
Do you want to mention any of the others?
Well, then we have seasonal water flows. You can see these dotted blue lines. I know they can't see my finger, but they can see the dotted blue lines. We're having fun here. So that would be rainy season runoff. But then you could also have year-round water, and that would be a stream or maybe a seep or a spring or something. And obviously the slope of the land, water is going to be coming downhill. Water is going to be gathering in low areas. And so this is just a way for you to map all of that out. And you'll see on here also best soil, really important to just take note of that for your planting planning. And then summer winds versus winter winds. Generally they are different, and it's important to know, okay, when we get big storms, those are going to be winter winds, and they're going to be intense but short duration and only during part of the year. Whereas our dominant winds are generally kind of gentler, more long-term, easier to plan for, but both types of wind need to be taken into account as we design where we put what, where's the house, and where's the front door, and where are our tender veggies and all of that.
Exactly. And so I just want to write, this part can be really confusing if you've never heard of it before, and we'll be covering it more in the course of course. But we're going to send you a resource called Sun Calc, and it will help you. You can put your address in, and it will give you information about at least the summer and the winter sun paths. It can just be really fun to start to think about if you're looking at your own home. So if this feels like, but again, both zones and sectors are patterns that already exist and that can be consciously adapted or changed. So that's the main point there. So we'll take questions after. If you have questions, pop them in the chat or write them down, and we'll get to them later. I'm sure there's going to be some. Okay, so cool. So again, this is the first design tool of permaculture design process, but we want to now go into patterns and show how We picked only 3. There's so many patterns, but we picked 3. So we're going to share those patterns with you now. Is there anything else you want to do? You want to start? We're going to start with one of the most beautiful patterns. And Nicole, just verify that you can actually see. Can you see the meandering stream channel?
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Excellent.
So the meander. First of all, I love the word meander. It's so nice. So when we're looking at all of these patterns, and so most patterns, right, we can say are about, again, flow and function, right? All patterns have a flow and they have a function. We're using a water example here, but this can be wind. This can be nutrients in soil, right? There's all kinds of ways.
Movement of beings across the landscape.
Yeah.
Movement of money through a community.
So what we love this diagram for, so a meander is a really common pattern that we see and that we want to work with on our landscape. We're not going to go completely into that right now, but what we want you to notice is the fastest flowing water is this dark blue. And look what it's doing. It's moving fast, right? This is the fastest moving, and look how it is taking out. It's taking out, it's forming this edge. So edge is another permaculture principle that's really important. Where the edge is where there's actually the most happening, right? And if you look at this is where this is quickly moving water, it's creating new, and as we know, these meanders can actually start to go way out, right? And change over time. If you look at rivers over time, if there's a beautiful meander map of the Mississippi River that shows over, I think, hundreds of years how that meander of that river changed. And notice how this is how nature does a river, right? It's a meander.
Yeah, nature does not do any straight lines, because in nature, most things are moving in spirals, and a meander is really just a flattened spiral.
Right.
It's a
So it's
two-dimensional
really going
spiral.
like this, right?
Yeah.
You can kind of see how if this, well, it's hard to do with this little arrow, but
Yeah,
it's a flattened spiral. So the fastest is going this, and then the slow moving water, what's the slow moving water doing? It's just it's all chill. And
It's meandering.
It's meandering.
Yeah.
And then it's depositing soil in these places, right? So this is where you're gonna have your nice picnic, and you're gonna go for a little swim. You're maybe not gonna want to go over here, depending on how big the water is, but maybe, right? So again, the slow moving is depositing, and the fast moving is
eroding.
Or
picking up. Yeah.
Picking up, taking away.
And so this is a way, this pattern helps us understand the way the world works, right? Oh, of course, fast moving water picks up sediment, picks up boulders, picks up rocks, causes more erosion. When the water slows down, those things fall out because the slower moving water can't hold that in suspension, right? Oh, so now we have this function lens that helps us understand this meander pattern when we see it in nature. And now we have this pattern concept that we can utilize in order to bring that function into our designs.
Right, because imagine if this were a straight line. Whoa, full erosion. There would be no slowing. The purpose of the meander is to slow things down so that you're not just getting erosion. So you're getting a little erosion here, but then you're getting a little bit of deposit right here, right? So a really great example that I think is banging pipes. Banging pipes in the house, right? So why are the pipes banging? So I guess they don't so much anymore, but the reason pipes used to bang in the wall is because they were straight, and the water wants to spiral. The water wants to meander. And so what was causing this boom, 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 boom was the water coming up against itself.
Right, those fast moving flows hitting one side and then the other side and then the other side of the pipe. And so the construction guys were like, hey, we'll just strap the pipes onto the beams under the floor, problem solved. But actually, we're not honoring water. We're not honoring how the water wants to move and what it needs to be healthy. That water forced into a straight channel tends to degrade and lose its vitality.
Right, and cause all kinds of problems.
Yeah,
right.
Cause
so again,
all kinds of problems.
We're wanting to create natural meanders in our design, and we'll show you one of our favorite designs that brings this in. Right?
Another non-water related example is just traffic calming, right? When they go and they put the islands in the streets, one side and then the other side and then the other side, so that as you're driving, you can't just zone out on your straight line. You gotta wake up, pay attention, take it in, swerve around this one, swerve around that one, move more slowly. And that is a very common way of getting people to slow down.
Right, because it's really the straight lines in our designs that cause the most destruction. honestly.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. So to presence a couple more principles in this pattern, we have the principle of collecting and storing energy. And so how are we collecting and storing energy with this meandering stream channel? Well, we're collecting this sediment that elsewise would have just been dumped into the bay or
Right.
whatever. And we're storing nutrients by allowing the water to slow down enough that the plant roots and the soil can take up those nutrients out of the water where it's actually a pollutant and bring it into the land where it is a resource. So to collect and store energy and to see pollution as an unused resource, that's another permaculture principle. Pollution is really just a resource that's concentrated all in one place where it becomes toxic. It's not able to be utilized.
Right.
So this meander helps us distribute, take up where we need to take up and drop out where we need to drop out.
Right. And then there's the make least change for the greatest effect is also an example of the meander, because again, just the slightest bit here, right, has a huge, again, it's so subtle, the meander. Okay.
But to think about making things meander through your landscape instead of having them shoot through as fast as possible is a beautiful way to design in with these concepts and really just have more surface area, have more edge, more opportunity to interact with whatever it is, be it deer or wind or water or money or people energy.
Yeah. Okay, great. So meander, our first pattern. Check. So now we're going to go to dendritic patterns. So again, this is a drainage example. But the dendritic pattern, this is found everywhere. And who was it? There was a woman that was on, I forget her name now. I thought I wrote it down. It was in the back. She had a beautiful dendritic painting.
Oh yeah, one of you had a nice dendritic artwork on your wall.
That we noticed.
Maybe
it was, Kimber.
Yeah.
I think it was Kimber.
Yeah.
Anyway, so dendritic drainage. So like the meander, it's one flow. And it's going like this, right, to, again, slow. And you might hear, and you would hear it in our class, the idea of slowing, sinking, spreading, saving, right? So it's helping to slow, it's helping keep the flow of energy. In this dendritic pattern, it's multiple flows of energy, right? This doesn't have to be water, but this example is. And so this is like the big river, you know, and coming into the sea, and these are the streams and the creeks that all come together. So if you look at a map of a watershed, we highly encourage you, if you aren't familiar with your own watershed, to just look it up. You can find it online, and to look at this dendritic pattern of the water channeling. And so what's happening here is you're bringing little bits into the larger bit for the larger flow. And no doubt this probably at the end here, this would turn into a meander, most likely, right? So just to tie those together.
And if you had the right kind of substrate here at the sea, if that was a mud flat, then you would see this whole dendritic pattern reverse. As the water flattens out and moves across that mud flat, it will rebranch back into these whole little things in the opposite of its collection pattern.
Right.
So cool.
So cool. And then the dendritic pattern is seen so many other places, right? Like leaves, for example, and trees, but the leaves, so the leaves are not moving the water, but they're taking the energy from photosynthesis, they're taking that substance and they want to spread it out and through to be most effective, to make sure it's all being, so the flow of energy, right? Again, so patterns are directing and maintaining and sustaining flows of energy in multiple directions.
So the leaf pattern would be distributing water and nutrients collected by the roots, a dendritic pattern pulling up, and then that would be distributed into the leaves going out, while the leaves are simultaneously collecting those photosynthetic products from the sun and the chloroplasts and whatnot, collecting and bringing those in, and then sending those out to the roots, so that there's a two-way, where's my hands here, there's a two-way thing going on. And think about our brains, think about neural networks and lungs, and there's so many really rich examples of the dendritic pattern. And it's really just about branching, right?
It's about branching. And this is where, in a permaculture design course, we would go into pruning, actually, and to purposefully help our plants direct the flows of energy, right? And to make sure that where the energy is flowing is where we want them to go. We're not going to do that now. But again, just want to really presence the dendritic pattern as so essential, and how are we directing the flows of energy on our landscape, in our gardens. And think about this. So tying them both together, should we?
We
Is
gotta
our
hit-
last,
we got to hit
oh
our
right,
principles real quick.
principles. Okay.
Yeah, so the principles involved in the dendritic patterns are, I think I'm just going to skip those as they're complicated. I'm just going to talk about that.
Okay.
Okay. So just to focus on the permaculture principle of maximizing functional diversity, that you'll notice that each one of these, sorry, I keep using my finger and you can't see it. Each one of these little branches has its own nuance of ecosystem that shifts at this point. And then this little section here is slightly different. So each little section brings in a new diversity of whatever, dissolved oxygen, nutrients, microorganisms, zooplankton, whatever. And so you get this amazing diversity, not only of what's happening in the water, but what's happening between the water and the bank, or what's happening between the neuron and the tissue that it's delivering to, or between the leaf vein and the tissue that it's delivering or receiving from. So that this concept of contact and edge and diversity is bringing so much opportunity and richness, and we can harvest that and design more of that, and you know, really just facilitate and expand that in our designs as much as we can.
Yeah. So there's, yeah, we won't go into all those principles. We're going to take our last few minutes to talk about. So the next pattern we're going to show you, I have to do stop share for a moment, and we're going to just show you this one. Yeah. Okay. Give me one sec. I just went and covered it up. So the next, so one of our favorite designs is the keyhole bed. So Nicole, confirm you see the keyhole, the two keyholes? Thank you. So the keyhole bed was also in that larger Gaia's Garden graphic. And so what the keyhole is doing, so what's happening here, it's doing so much actually. So here you can,
super functional.
It's very functional. I want to move these faces so that I can see. There we go. So notice that
Do the simple one first.
so this is the simple one. So the idea of a keyhole bed is, first of all, just for function. What you're doing with a keyhole bed is you're creating more space to actually grow food, right? Because you can actually grow more space here than if this were a box. And there's actually more space, actual space in a curved line than there in a straight line. So creating curves like a meander, like look at the meander. If that were a straight line, it would be much shorter. The meander, you pull it out, it's much longer, right? So
you have way more planting area in the same amount of square footage than you could with a series of rows. And look at just a little tiny bit of path.
Yes, so there's a tiny little path, and you can access it around the edges, and you can access it and go inside, right? So this is sort of the dendritic part, is a lot of what's happening underneath with the different plants and how they're moving, and the meander is in the sense of having more space, having more space where there's actually something happening, where the resources are in, like in a sense,
totally.
in the case of a meander.
Totally. And you have the three-dimensionality of the meander, because oftentimes the way we design our paths is we dig them out and fill them with organic matter, and we use that soil to create the bed space. So now we have the meander going down into the earth, into the trench, and then coming up over the top of the bed, and then potentially going down into another pathway around the perimeter. So we've created this kind of horizontal meandering, as well as the more two-dimensional meandering in the bed itself.
And so this is just a series of keyholes. And this is just so lovely. And I will say that I did a permaculture design once where we did this too. We actually created a keyhole of keyholes because it was supposed to be community gardens. And we were trying to, and it needed to be a certain number of plots for people to garden. And then we're like, oh, this is what we need to do, because we could have more people could have more plantable space by using the keyhole. So this is kind of like what it was. So imagine then we would split them down. So one family would have half this keyhole, another family would have half this keyhole, way more space, but they're sharing the actual keyhole part. They're sharing the path, but that's okay, right? Because they can also access it from over here. So it's a beautiful way to take a small space and create way more plantable space. And so I know that people, you know, with the coronavirus, everybody's been gardening, and what I've been seeing a lot of is is raised beds, and raised beds are great. There's not a problem, but for people who don't have a lot of space, you might want to check out the keyhole. And what I want to say is the other reason people put in their raised beds is for gopher protection. And I will say that in my home, I use the keyholes, and because this is usually what we call a swale, which is a water infiltration system that also is a pathway. So this is all filled with wood chips, but this is dug in about 1.5 feet. And it's also dug in on the outside. So guess what gophers don't like? They don't like to swim through wood chips. They don't do it. And so the things that are planted in my keyhole beds, I don't have an issue. Now, the raccoons with the babies that come and dig my stuff out and eat the roots, okay, that's another story. But the main reason, but they're gonna come to your raised beds too. So again, this keyhole pattern is a beautiful example of bringing the meander and the dendritic patterns together for super functionality in your gardens or in your life.
And the zone and sector pattern is also useful here too. If you did a zone and sector analysis of your keyhole, you would note that, oh, the edges around the paths, these are going to be your zone 1s, easiest to access. The centers of these beds are, you know, not zone 5, right, but more like a zone 2, 3. I got to reach all the way in there. I'm going to plant the things that are going to take months to ripen, and the stuff that I need to harvest every day will be on the edges. And then, so that would be your zone analysis of a keyhole bed. And then your sector analysis of a keyhole bed is, well, where is the sun coming from, right? So if this was sort of typically arranged with north on top, then this pathway is entering from the east. And so this whole left side is receiving morning sun. And then the whole thing could be getting western shady from in the afternoon. Like if these things on this outer left edge were larger, you would be shading from the hot afternoon winds, which could be really useful depending on your climate. Most often we face the pathway towards the south so that you enter from the south, and then the whole arc of your keyhole bed is getting maximum solar aspect. So that's just one example of how you could apply the zones and the sectors to your keyhole or your compounded keyhole.
Yeah, and you know who loves keyhole beds are cats. Actually, like they'll go, because this is the sunny,
right,
they're sunny, they're hidden, dogs as well, and little children. I have my friends, younger kids come, and the one, he's just 5, and he'll go into the keyhole and just sit. And he's like, Anne, it's like once I go in there, it's like a jungle, you know, so it's really magical and a beautiful space. So that's our last favorite pattern that we're going to share with you.
A few principles on that one.
A few principles on that one. And so the principles for this is relative location, right? So, you know, you're not just going to willy-nilly do a keyhole bed. You are going to, as Lydia said, look at where the sun's coming from, where's the shade coming from, where's the wind coming from? The wildlife. Where are you in relation to, right? So you're wanting your keyhole beds are normally like, well, they could be in a zone 3, but you most likely you're wanting to be harvesting them regularly. So the relative location is really important. Let's just do.
How about the problem is the solution? So the problem is the solution is quite a mind bender of a principle. Like, I don't get it. The problem is the problem. How does it become a solution? Well, if the problem is that you can't access your beds, or the problem is that you don't have enough planting space, or the problem is that things are shading each other out that you don't want shaded out, it's just a spatial redesign issue so that that problem becomes its own solution, so that the access to the beds opens up this whole other realm of functionality through this keyhole design that before you were really struggling with.
And then the last one, because this just fits in perfectly, is I'm going to do, yes, we agree. I'm doing a design from patterns to detail, right? So we've just given you 3 patterns and shown you how you can do that, how you can take the meander, how you can take the dendritic and create the keyhole, right? And so you're designing from patterns to detail. And this is a really, again, this is one of the most critical principles I feel, and it's one that really shapes the way that I design myself. And that one comes from David Holmgren. So
Yeah.
design from patterns to detail.
Yeah, because so often we become lost in the weeds of the details without understanding that we've lost the functionality of the bigger pattern. So you take a few big patterns that you understand what they do, how they operate, what their function is, and you utilize them as your foundational structure for the entire design. And then once that's all laid out, then you can go into those details and you know that your bigger picture is already settled, that whatever bigger problems you have already been resolved. And now you can micro plan at will.
Right. And like we said, just one last thing about the zones and sectors are patterns, right? So you're designing from those patterns, looking at where do you walk, where do you spend time, where are you, your own pattern should also be informing the design of your landscape. So that's our last one. I'm going to stop sharing. That's fun.
That was a whirlwind. How you doing, everyone?
I think whirlwind is another pattern, right?
Yeah, whirlwind is a good spiral pattern.
Okay.
That's wonderful. So thank you guys. You're just a breath of fresh air. Every time I hear things about permaculture, you can relate it to so many things, you know, like people. You have the zone 1 people. Sometimes I just treat my zone 5 people like my zone 1 people rather than the opposite, right? So I love seeing how this can be applied. But I'm gonna ask quickly for everybody to take a short survey. This really helps us determine kind of what classes we select, what topics we select. So if you could take that survey, that would be great. And let's go to some of the questions. And right now is the great time to enter your questions into the chat. So what's the Sun Calc link? I'm not sure what that question is.
And that, so we're going to send Nicole shortly, later today, a list of resources, and we'll include, I wrote down Sun Calc in here. And the Sun Calc, is it a gov? I just don't remember if it's a gov or an org. So we want to get you the right one, and that's where you just put in your address, and it will give you, and you can put in your address and a date, and so it can tell you the sun. And we normally recommend that you do it, that you put the date of the winter solstice and the summer solstice, so you're getting the
extremes.
The extremes.
Yeah. But it'll tell you where exactly the sun will rise and set, and how high in the sky the sun will rise. And there's a few other tools to help you figure out, you know, if you have trees here, where will the shade be, etc. But this is all to just help you plan for a year when you are really only able to observe this moment in time as you are digging your hole. So it gives you that bigger picture.
Excellent. So, did you say that the way to avoid gophers is to dig the keyhole design 18 inches deep and put wood chips in there? Question.
Yeah. I mean,
it has to go all the way around.
It has to go all the way around. And I wonder if I could include a picture of one of my keyhole beds.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the idea is that, so I'm using it for water infiltration. So that's that same path is also collecting water at one of the lowest points in my yard. And my yard is actually quite flat, but it's also right before the foundation of my house. So when we do have a big rain event, the water is just going into the ground right there instead of just floating around or going under my house. So yes, I've had wonderful success with the gophers just like, I'm not going there.
Because the wood chips just collapse down on them immediately. And so it's not fun for them to try to dig through there. And I mean, and this is super relevant because often we're encouraging people to use these kind of patterns and create their gardens based on not boxes, not rectangles. And so, yeah, the gopher wire situation, the gopher protection situation gets more complicated. And so it's really about choosing these techniques. You know, this kind of wood chip moat is helpful, but it's not totally foolproof. So choosing your little bit stronger things to go in your keyhole bed, and maybe your very tenderest, babyest things that are so delicious to every other animal in the world, including you. Maybe those you have a little tiny Alcatraz bed that's completely protected.
That's what I have.
But then you,
that's where my greens and my chard and all that. Yeah.
But then you have, you know, these keyhole beds and compound keyholes and other more integrated growing areas where there's a little bit of danger, but you've also selected things responsibly to understand what they can handle and what they can't handle.
Yeah.
So there's a comment, super, you are both wonderful. Thanks so much. So I had to tell you that one. Let's get to this next question. Can we get started now, or do we really need to observe all 4 seasons first?
Oh, that's such a great question. Of course, you can get started now. I'm wondering, you know, so this is from Jill, you know, how long you've been in the space you're in. You might already have some good sort of memory of what things are like, and you don't. I think the sun calc would be helpful.
Yeah.
Right. To even just knowing where your sun and is coming from in the winter and the summer. Just having an idea, like a lot of people aren't even thinking about like, oh, I don't know where the wind is coming from. People often, and then they're remembering like, oh, but actually every time it rains in the winter, it's smashing against these doors or these windows. So, oh, the wind during a storm is commonly here, right? So it's just starting to think. So you might already, Jill, have information, and it's just thinking of it, taking the information you already have and thinking it through.
So being able to connect your observations of what you see right now on the site to how that happened, right? To be able to cast your mind back. And we call this reading the landscape. So that if you see trees that are blown like this, oh, you can say, oh yeah, I bet there's some strong winds coming in this direction, right? Oh, so that pattern in the trees tells you about some force, some sector energy that you can't see in that moment. Maybe it's still and beautiful today. Or like, oh, you see an erosion pattern, or you see a certain type of soil collected in a certain area. Oh, it's a dried up clay pit. This must be a place where it's a soggy, wet mess in the wintertime. And oh, what plants are growing where? Well, this plant only grows where it has year-round water access, so it must be tapping into some water here. Or this plant only grows in compacted soil, or this plant is the best for completely exposed, no nutrients, no protection whatsoever. So learning how to understand what all your little observations mean gives you the context of the whole year.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it is hard to wait a whole year before doing anything. And especially as a professional designer, nobody's going to pay us to just sit around and look at their property for a year before we do anything. So we have to be able to read all of these other keys on the landscape to tell us. But then we ask the homeowner, we ask the neighbors, we check out whatever online resources we can get our hands on so that we are able to educate ourselves as fully as possible before making any changes.
Okay, so we have a question. How do you build a spring?
So springs occur naturally based on geology and water. You know, usually a pressure, water coming out under pressure is from some other extended geology where the water has sunk down, and then it can only escape in one direction. So you can't build a spring. You can develop a well and build a spring box to, you know, siphon the water off. And that's a whole another series of workshops. So we're just going to leave it at that. If you have a spring on your property, you're lucky. There may be one you don't know about, and you can look for the signs again to see if there's maybe one you can find. But yes, they occur on their own based on the geology.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a house in Vallejo and a backyard that is totally blank except for one tree. Is there one small thing I can actually do to get started?
Yes, read this book.
Read this book, Gaia's Garden.
Yes.
It's not even that thick.
See how accessible? Great pictures, accessible, friendly text.
So it's called Gaia's Garden, A Guide to Home Scale Permaculture. It was the very first, one of the very first books that I got, and it has great graphics, super easy. I think it's awesome, Jill, that you're basically at the gift of a blank slate, right? So
it can be
challenging too. But, oh, you do have that book. Okay, great.
Get to work. Yeah, I mean, a great pattern, a starter pattern that we haven't specifically addressed, but if you have one tree that you love or even just like, and you want to enhance it, the idea of the Permaculture Guild, which has some similarities with the Keyhole, but you're basically selecting other plants to create a community around that tree. And some of those plants are going to help draw in pollinators, and some of those plants are going to help concentrate micronutrients, and some of those plants are going to help deter pests, and some of those plants are just going to drop a lot of leaves and protect the soil and add organic matter. And it is hard to start when you have a blank slate and you're like, I could do anything.
Yeah, so I'm wondering the type of tree, I guess. Yeah. So you could do a tree guild, and that could just be beautiful. And you can start to...
Great chapter on gilding the garden in
this book.
Yeah. But also often we really start with the water, what's happening with the water. So you have a house, you have gutters, you have downspouts. Can you direct the downspout water to someplace to get it to meander, to get it to go into the central path of a keyhole bed? And how can you use the water as the first piece of your design skeleton and then design around that?
Yeah.
So there's a question about just if this presentation is being recorded. So it is being recorded, and we will have it on our YouTube channel. And yeah, so that's it. And I think that I don't see any other questions. Lydia and Anne will be teaching another class on November 7th, so I encourage you to register for that. And there'll be 2 other classes in December and January. If you want to dive deeper into this, consider taking the Permaculture Design Certificate course that we're going to be having here in Benicia in January, the end of January. So let's see if there's a few more came in. Nope.
I'm so excited to be with y'all, Nicole and Allison. And yeah.
And in the design course, we go into this. I mean, this is a lot of the sort of day one material. And then we move through a curriculum where we focus on soil and soil health and building soil fertility. And then we talk about water, and good soil can hold water. Poor soil becomes a soggy mess or a dried out hardpan. How do we keep the water that falls on our sites and have it interact in a really good way? Then we move into plants and agroforestry. How do you understand plant communities? How do you design functional plant communities?
And so we'll be giving you a taster of that in November. We're going to start to go into those 3 main things in November. So that's also very exciting. Yeah.
And then we dive more into the design process. There's sort of a circular point by point kind of guide that you can use that's non-linear. Of course, you're always circling back because this is permaculture, but it does give you a little bit of a roadmap. And then we get into these more non-land-based pieces of it, like how do we design healthy functional communities, and what about energy, what about building materials, designing for disaster. And everybody in the permaculture course gets into a group with other people who live nearby, and you find a site and you actually do a permaculture design as a group. And that has its challenges logistically usually, but you know, often people just finding, oh, what do I already know? What do I have to contribute? What do I need to learn? But far and above, people say at the end of the courses, they say that design project, even though it seemed so overwhelming when it was first introduced, it's the thing that integrates it all and just brings it home.
Right, it's direct integration. So you're using everything we just talked about today, and then everything we'll talk about more, using it directly, immediately. Yeah, and with the product, and then you actually get to see it.
You don't, big map.
Right, with a big map, and you don't have to actually implement the design. But,
it's just an exercise.
It's an exercise, but that makes it fun too, because you don't have to worry about budget necessarily. You don't have to worry about, reality you do, because you're taking in zones and sectors, but it allows you to be very, very creative.
Yeah, and you work with a group, so you get to benefit from the background, skills, wisdom, experience of these other people in your group while you're developing your own skills and experience.
Let's see, city codes for planting. Oh, this is a great one. I have a friend who has bamboo and who dug about 18 inches down. It looks pretty and I love it, but I also know that it can go wild. How can I find out if this is okay, allowed, manageable, or even wise? Ooh, there's a lot to say about that.
So far, I don't think there's specific laws on what you can plant outside of, there's certain invasive species that are strongly discouraged. And that's a whole other conceptual conversation about invasive species. The laws are more clear on where you can plant something, like things of certain height can't be closer than 20 feet to your property line or 6 feet to your property line. And now there's a lot of fire safety recommendations. But yeah, a lot of that is city specific, those kind of micro details, you know, whether or not you can have a rooster, how much water you can hold in a tank, how much soil you can move without a permit. Like those are all very specific.
Right, and every community is different. That's the other thing that we've noticed. You know, we've been trying to get, at least for Santa Cruz, exactly that information about the best way to find out city codes for planting. But, you know, in some counties, you go to one office and then in another county, you go to a different office. But I find the planning what is it? Just the planning office where you get the maps?
The assessors?
The assessor's
county
office.
assessor.
The county assessors have been helpful with us in the past, and if they can't if they can't tell you what you need, they know exactly who to tell you to go. That's at least in our experience with different counties.
Yeah. But often if you just Google your city and, you know, some keywords around your question, you'll be able to kind of meander your way into the answer that you're looking for.
Yeah, someone did ask about an online permaculture course. Yeah, you know, and so yes, there are definitely permaculture certificates online. We don't offer them, but and it's totally manageable to do them online, I guess. And like as someone said, ours will be hybrid, so we'll have some online and then definitely hands-on. Yeah. And we really believe firmly that, you know, the gift of permaculture, you know, one of the gifts is, you know, really getting dirty, you know, really it's tactile, it's with your hands, it's full sensory. So, you know, so if you need to do an online course, what I would recommend is to just make sure that they give you lots of opportunity and direction to do hands-on, at least in your own space or somewhere. Because, you know, there's so many books. I mean, show them the manual for Pete's sake. I mean, the permaculture design manual is freaking huge. It's so big, right? So the best way to actually learn that is to take bits of it and then actually do it. Oh, Retro Suburbia. We're getting all of our books out. We use them all to prop up the computer. Yeah. So if you're looking for a class, make sure that piece is what do you say, like is a critical component of any online certificate program, because just reading about it, again, this is our other next favorite, or one of our other favorite books. It's called Retro Suburbia, and we'll send this in the book list, and this is actually by David Holmgren. It's just a couple of years old, and we've been looking at it lately around fire remediation and mitigation, and there's a lot of great information in this book about that, as well as so much more. And this is really good for y'all who are up in Vallejo, right? So we're all sort of living in these urban centers, and what's the best way to take the permaculture principles and patterns and design processes and put them into suburban areas. So
just another word on online courses, though. Of course, a good online course is going to provide opportunities for you to have surface area with your classmates. But that is one of the best things about a permaculture course, is that you meet other people who at the very least had the same curiosity and signed up, and perhaps have a body of related experience that you could totally dive into with them and be guided by, or inspired or lit up, and that the surface area between the people, the edge between the people in the conversations that you have at lunch or during your break or while you're sharing a shovel, planting a tree, and Corona, yes, things are a little different now, but you know, like, but other people's questions, other people's passions, and we've seen time and time again, people seriously, they meet, they get married, you know, sometimes shortly after. Permaculture babies. We've had people like just best friends. I mean, the one student we had ended up running for city council? Is that what she's on? For city council, and her design group members were her biggest, you know, they were on her campaign. So just really deep relationships develop, because this work, you know, as Nicole said, and as we do in Vital Cycles, it is actually, yes, we're dealing with the landscape, but it is so personal, right? It really hits home when we start designing with ourselves in mind, putting ourselves into the equation, not as a human-centric focus, but as a personal, emotional, full sensory being interacting and designing with other beings in mind, right? And so that process of working with other people is really powerful. So as a member, we want to just think of ourselves as a member of this larger community. We are remembering how to do this.
You know, that's actually, I took a PDC with Toby, so I have my Gaia's Garden book here. And when he was alive, it was one of the last PDCs that he did. And it was so life-changing. It was more of a remembering of like what my system already knew, and it was like it was so logical, and you know, it could be applied to so many areas. Anyway, I just wanted to share that because it was life-changing for me, and you know, and it got me into the work I'm doing, and it seemed like different doors opened of like, start taking action, you know, get do something with it. And yeah, so that's, and I did have one question. I had one question, just resources for fire sector and resources on how to design. That's a big, topic in many of our communities here in California. And just if you could provide any resources on, like, if people are in the fire zone, what could they do? But in a way that's not just fear-based, right? Because it's like a lot of times it's so want to get rid of all the wood chips and, so.
We have a number of cool articles that we'll pick our favorites. There's a nice section in Retro Suburbia here on how to prepare your home and your landscape. It's not just like moonscape it out for 100 feet from the house, and we keep laughing about this idea like, oh, our homes, we have water pumped into them, or we have our tanks or our wells or whatever, and then we use the water, and instead of putting that back into the drain to some septic system, why are we not releasing that water on the landscape all around us, i.e. gray water use, right? Because then every house is a little wet spot on the landscape, and every house is producing its own fire buffer with its own wastewater. And what a concept,
yeah,
and just even managing the water on our landscapes in a good way in general and getting it to soak in instead of run off creates saturated soil in the water table that the plants can then access to have more water in their bodies so that they are cooling factors instead of flammable, dangerous elements around our house.
Yeah, and there are some great lists. I mean, I think we could share the list of native fire resistant plants that people here in Santa Cruz are encouraging people to plant. So there are plants that actually hold water and trees that actually hold water and will actually cool a fire coming towards you. And one of the things that David Holmgren says in his book of Retro Suburbia is that in an urban fire like we've had, your neighbor's tree is not the most dangerous thing. Your neighbor's house. Our houses are incredibly flammable and often built with such toxic materials that will just combust right away. So, and we brought this up in the very beginning. So, really becoming fire wise, I guess they're saying now, so that we're not doing no, you don't need to have a fire break all around your house, that having more moisture, having fire resistance, and also getting rid of all the stuff in our homes is also really good, right?
Poor storage design, and then having an unmaintained landscape that's full of dead wood that's not in contact with the microorganisms that are going to turn it into compost, right? So this is a huge subject, and you can tell we're quite excited about it. But just back to building materials, there has been so much attention paid to fire resistant building materials, but they're only resistant, and given that your house burns hotter and longer than a copse of trees of the same volume, why are we still building our houses with materials that are only fire resistant? And why are we using asphalt shingle that melts and sort of flows like flaming napalm? And this is our, our class A shingle material. So lots of big systems that need to be addressed. And so another question.
I didn't want to have you stop. I just want to make sure we got to the last question. There was a question from Rachel that just asked, are the permaculture principles more prevalent maybe in drier climates or environments or in wetter areas? And the answer to that is, Australia is a great example. Australia is desert and rainforest. Actually the permaculture principles are applicable anywhere, and there's beautiful demonstration gardens, communities in Bali, in where was Penny just recently, all around the world in lots of tropical places.
Indonesia, Peru, the Middle East. There's projects in Jordan, really amazing projects where they get like 2 inches of rain a year, and they've established these massive food forests based on some of these patterns and principles. And
so I think that but in answer to the question, so they're really relevant for any type of climate, dry or wet. And then probably what would happen are there would be more principles, there would be different principles that you would then use primarily in a more wet climate than in the drier. So they would focus you. We definitely focused on ones, well, they could also be used anywhere, but we focused on ones that were most relevant for the patterns that we were showing. But you can apply them anywhere. And there, yeah, and if you look up, if you want to just geek out on it completely, you can just go online and just Google like permaculture Bali, permaculture, or tropical permaculture.
Right.
They're beautiful, beautiful examples of that work being done.
But I would say that the use of the permaculture principles is more prevalent in more extreme environments. So where people are struggling with more constraints, more hardship, and less resources, they are forced to really engage with these principles and concepts more fully because they just don't have the workarounds. Unless you have unlimited fossil fuel energy, which you can exploit, in which case you can avoid natural consequences until those resources run out. But yeah, for responsible ecological living on the landscape, the more extreme the environment is, the more tuned in we have to be as designers to the principles of how to design functional systems.
Yeah. So great question. Thank you, Rachel.
Good note to end on. It's 12:30, and I think we got to all the questions and everything. So thank you so much, you guys, for being here. Really, this was fabulous. Oh, and a thank you for your beautiful singing.
Thank you. Thanks, Jill, for all your questions.
Yeah. What was the name of the artist again in the song? Because I'm going to look it up right now.
Rising
Appalachia.
Rising Appalachia. There's
another
I'm missing
I
an
in there. Oh, yeah. Oh. Yes, two sisters who grew up in Georgia, and their mom was big into wildcrafting in the Appalachian hills and mountains, and so they just had this amazing musical and natural, nature-enhanced, integrated childhood, and they're like these total powerhouse singers, and all of their songs are really about how do we live as humans now in this time of unraveling or turning of uncertainty and change, and they're uplifting and beautiful.
Songs, they just,
you can sing along, and
my daughters are like, I really like them because they're not, all their songs aren't like about love and bad relationships. actually about real life. You know, my daughters are 14 and 16, so that comment coming from them I find so lovely. You know,
that your dog didn't die, your truck didn't break down, and you didn't get your heart broke. You know.
I don't want to go. Thank you, Anne and Lydia. This was so beautiful. I'm so excited that you're coming to Benicia too for the PDC. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Everyone go take good care of yourself and your loved ones. You know, take good care of this earth and pass on your excess, whatever. I'm going to pass on some pomegranates today because I've got a ton from my tree.
Ooh, wish we lived closer.
Right. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.